I'm going to do a quick demo of deploying Hasura's GraphQL engine on database. So we're going to get started with Heroku. We have a one-click deploy on Heroku that will give you a database and the GraphQL engine as well. I'll set the name for my app and I'll hit deploy. Because of how lightweight Hasura is, this will just take a few seconds to deploy on Heroku. And this will use Heroku's free tier Postgres and Heroku's free tier hosting to deploy. So this is already deployed. Let's head to the Hasura UI. Now what I can do is create a table and then start querying it. So let's create a to-do table. Every to-do has an ID, a to-do itself, when it was created, and the user that created the to-do. And this is just standard database modeling. And I can insert a few sample items. So let's say deploy GraphQL app created by user ID 1. Now, as soon as I have some data in this database and I've created the table, I can basically start making GraphQL queries on it. So that's the API endpoint, and I'm going to just type out a GraphQL query that's automatically available. So I can fetch to-dos, I can fetch their ID, I can fetch the name of the to-do, the user ID that created it, and when it was created. I can also insert to-do, so that API is also available, and that's called a GraphQL mutation. So I can insert a to-do, and let's say this is inserted by user ID 2. And once a to-do is inserted, I would like to see the ID that's automatically generated as well. So that's a returning ID, and I can insert the to-do. I can insert stuff fairly quickly. And now you'll see that this data is there in the table, right? So because this database is actually running on Postgres, I can connect to the database directly as well. And I'm just going to look at the database credentials here given to me by Heroku. And let me connect to the database. So that's where you can see that the tables are already here. I can make an SQL query to select data from that table, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to import a sample data set that I have, which is a music database data set. I'm going to import this database to show you how you can get GraphQL instantly on an existing database. This is a Chinook database that's often used for benchmarking or trying a database out. It has albums, artists, tracks, and that's the data that I'm importing right now. Once you start importing the data and you head to the Hasura UI, you'll see that these tables come up. Now these tables are untracked, so they're not on GraphQL yet, but as soon as I track them, I can start querying these tables via GraphQL. I can also convert the relationships that are there inside this database into GraphQL relationships instantly. And you can kind of see that the data is already here. What I can now do is I can basically start making queries to fetch data from this database without having to write any code. So here I'm going to fetch albums, the ID of the album, the title of the album. And you can see that the data starts coming up here. So I can start using this in my app instantly. I can also fetch information from the graph. So what I can say is I want every album and the artist, which is in a different table, but that information gets joined automatically. So I can fetch the album and the name of the artist of that album in the same query. And so I don't have to write different API endpoints to kind of fetch this data. This is the power of GraphQL that is instantly accessible. Let's take a look at the performance of this GraphQL engine. I can use Heroku's metrics to take a quick look. And you can see that it's just at 52 MB. Our benchmarks show that you can get thousands of requests per second at just about 60 MB of RAM consumption. And Heroku gives you 512 MB of RAM, and we're barely using just 10% of that. GraphQL engines that are available today need at least about 600 MB to a gig of RAM, and might not even work on Heroku's free tier. To make it safe and easy for your applications to query the database directly, Hasura also gives you access control rules. You can create different roles, create different rules for your applications to be able to query and insert data into the database safely.